Well, SABC welcomes the amendment of must-carry regulations for 2022 by ICASA. South Africa has been talking about migrating to digital TV from analog for about 20 years, but that switch hasn't happened. Why have we not met any of these deadlines? And with retrenchments in the media industry and closure of TV stations, of magazines and newspapers, we ask if there is space for journalism graduates. Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. I'm your new host, Naledi Muleo. Now, this is where we look at the intersection between media and audiences. This show is not complete without your say. Connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed to you. Use hashtag SABC Media and Society and call us on 011-714-6841 or 011-714-6842. Well, we're going to get into all of those discussions in a moment. Stay with us. We're back after this. Welcome back to Media and Society. So let's get into those discussions for this Sunday morning. The amendment of the must-carry regulations for 2022, which now requires subscription broadcasters to carry the public broadcasters' channels subject to commercially negotiable terms, was announced this week. So the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa has amended the must-carry regulations. The regulations now require that subscription broadcasters carry public broadcasters on their channels. But this is a very complicated discussion, and I think we need to really unpack it. And to do so, we are joined in studio now by the head of SABC Policy and Regulatory Affairs, Mr. Phili Muilwa. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for getting up on Sunday morning to have this very technical discussion with us, right? It's a lot of English, but what does this amendment actually mean?
Thank you, Naledi, and welcome also to your debut show. These regulations actually commenced in 2008. And just to give a context and background, the intention of these regulations when they came into being was for South African public to be able to access SABC channels on a subscription broadcasting service. But however, that has to be done under certain conditions. And the conditions as was provided for by the Act was that the parties must negotiate commercial terms because, as you may be aware, we have content that we pay for, and no one can use our channels to benefit himself commercially without not having any return benefit for the SABC. So these regulations started in 2008. Unfortunately, they were not favorable to us. The provision that was there was that we must offer our channels to subscription broadcaster for free. And we contested these. We couldn't get it right at the time. Fortunately enough, even when the board came in 2017, they actually insisted on this and made sure that this get to be corrected. And the regulator now came with these new regulations now. So
I think, I understand what we're saying, but I think for the benefit of the viewer, if we can perhaps, even simplify it even further. So this is essentially saying that broadcasters like the likes of DSTV must continue to broadcast SABC channels on their platforms at no cost.
No. That's the opposite now. In 2008, it was at no cost. So the regulations have now been amended, which is why we're saying we welcome these new regulations that were published on the 31st of March, which corrected that provision that made us to offer our channels for free. Now the regulations are saying, inconsistently with the Act, that we must negotiate commercial terms. And our notion has been must carry, must pay. If I may put it simple that way, that you can't carry SABC channels and you don't pay for them.
Yeah, there's a lot of confidence in your voice, which I'm quite enjoying, because that speaks to the success levels of channels like SABC's channels, particularly on subscription platforms. I mean, what has that been looking like?
Oh, it has been great. I mean, if you look at the first top 20, for example, soapies, SABC is there. Your Generations, your Uzalo. I mean, these are audience-driving, shows, and they generate a lot of revenue. So whoever carries our channels, then the chance of driving subscription on their platform and even audience. So that is why it makes a lot of sense that we need to negotiate commercial terms, because you also pay for our content. Is
it true that many of South African viewers are in fact taking up subscription broadcasters, particularly because they want to access the SABC, even though it has been available to them?
Yes, remember one of the biggest issue we have in this country is that not everyone is able to receive the SABC, for example, in certain areas where the topography is bad, the mountains and the signal is not there. So we'll see even very poor people are having satellite dishes because they want to access the SABC. And therefore, that makes it very important that when whoever carries us must be able to ensure that they negotiate commercial terms and we are able to benefit also as the SABC from that kind of a deal.
How do we start to shape what the value of those commercial terms really is? I mean, that's a very technical monetary discussion.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's for commercial negotiations, as you say, but obviously you look at variables such as the value of the channel, the kind of audiences that it drives. I mean, we've got really big brands of channels here. I mean, SABC 1, 2, and 3, these are the big brands. And they've been there, and no one can... I mean, if you look at the audience share that we command for television in the market, that's very significant. And therefore, whoever carries us knows exactly that it stands a better chance of getting more audiences.
Right. The conversations that the public broadcaster then is having with subscription broadcasters?
Well, the conversations are going to start. These regulations are now effective from the 31st of March. Within 6 months, they must request us to offer them the channels. And the regulations have given steps of negotiation. 6 months, you make a request for the channels from the public broadcaster. 3 months, you must conclude the negotiations. And that's the time limits that have been put between the parties to negotiate because I think the intention is to make sure that South Africans continue to get SABC channels. We are a public broadcaster.
Yeah, when we've been having these conversations in the country around DTT and moving to digital terrestrial, I think for a lot of South Africans, there's been that fear about whether or not my TV is going to be switched off. So even with this regulation and this amendment, can you guarantee that the SABC viewer will still have content moving forward, particularly as a result of these amendments?
Yes, the regulations are actually trying to cover for that, that while the status quo remains, there is this period within to negotiate. So it's not about switching off and starting to negotiate. It's not like that. So people must be rest assured. And I mean, the negotiations, both parties need each other. We are looking forward to a good faith negotiations. Yeah,
it's an interesting time of the year. It really, really is. Around March, April, a lot of these shifts start to happen in the media industry. And I know that you'll keep us updated in your conversations with subscription broadcasters as well. That there is the head of SABC Policy and Regulatory Affairs, Mr. Fili Muilwa. Stay with us because when we come back, we're going to unpack digital terrestrial television, what it means for you. Will your TV stay on? We'll answer those questions after this. Welcome back. Well, it was in 2006 that South Africa pledged that this country would join many other around the world by migrating from analog TV to digital terrestrial television. Now, Finland completed its migration process the following year, which was 2007. The first deadline in South Africa was in 2011. It wasn't met. There were many others that haven't been met since then. Reports also suggest that only half of DTT decoders have been installed in South Africa. But let's continue with that discussion. To help us understand the issues around DTT a little bit better, we are joined by William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. William, a good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that we've been talking about DTT in this country, correct, since 2006. But if I'm being very honest with you, it's taken me well over 10 years to actually understand what DTT is. So can we start there? What on earth is DTT?
So essentially, the way that SABC tends to broadcast SABC 1, 2, 3 and other free-to-air services, ETV and community television, the way they broadcast is they use particular frequencies, and they're using analog. And what they're wanting to move across is to digital signals and to digital frequencies. And that means that they're wanting to free up those frequencies for the mobile operators. So the mobile operators have been fighting and arguing and demanding and pleading and begging to get access to this critical spectrum, because it means, and they claim, that we'll get significantly cheaper data. For the television, it means that you'll start to move on to a different way of broadcasting, which means that SABC can have more channels, you can have subtitles, you can do all sorts of things. Your quality of signal is better, all sorts of things. So you're generally, as a user, you should be getting a much better digital experience. Your television should be a lot better.
Yeah, but there are the concerns, of course, which I know that you have raised and many other organizations have raised as well, about how that transition could leave many behind. And we're talking about millions of people, essentially.
Yeah, so the big problem, of course, is that in order to make the transition from an analog, so your old TV set with a set of bunny ears, you need to then have either a digital TV that's got a built-in decoder into it, or you need a set-top box, which is a box that then can decode that signal and put it into your normal old analog TV. The trouble is government had committed to giving at least 3.5 million of these things to indigent homes. And so they were meant to do this, and they were meant to do this rollout. There's been a whole lot of legal battles. It's been a big, messy affair. And on top of that, we've had ministers changing so frequently that you can barely keep up. Many of them didn't have the slightest idea or interest or inclination to do this. And suddenly then you get a minister who comes in and she says, right, I want to do this, and we must get it done, and we must get it done now. So good on the urgency, great, except you can't do it where you're going to leave the most vulnerable and the poorest of the poor with nothing. Because if they switch that signal off, anyone who's got just an old standard TV set and bunny ears, they will lose all television, finish.
Yeah, and I think it's important to of course, mention that access to information is a basic human right in this country. So switching off people's connectivity to the world is an infringement on that right.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've argued in the court case, to say that this is fundamentally a violation of people's right to access to information. If you go ahead and cut the poorest of the poor off and leaving them with no access to television, it means that they can still get radio, but how are they meant to learn other things that they'd come to rely on and as ordinary functioning citizens? And it also then deepens that digital divide. So you further degrading people's rights to access to information. So it's not just the violation itself, it's the further degradation of those rights.
Yeah, unfortunately though, we've hit this point where there's the constant push and pull of the urgency for us to catch up with the rest of the world and go digital, and then we face that human rights crisis really that we need to address before we move forward. I don't know what we do now, but I wonder if it's important to also talk about accountability. How have we missed the mark for the past, all the way since 2006? Who's to blame for the dilly-dallying?
Well, government largely, and Parliament has failed abjectly to hold the government to account, to ask them questions, to demand follow-ups, to say, why are these set-top boxes sitting in these warehouses? Why haven't they been rolled out? The government has said the registration process was open. Why weren't they doing, communications campaigns? Why weren't they in the towns and cities like they theoretically are now, saying this is why people need to do it? You can't just think, and what they did was give everyone a 3-week period and say, register by then, or if you don't register, if you register after that, well, then you're only going to get television 3 to 6 months after the switch off. So you'll be in the dark for at least 3 to 6 months until you get it. So government is clearly the one to blame for this, for not having moved that. Centec issued a tender on the 22nd of March, giving people 3 days to submit their papers for a 3-year contract to install set-top boxes. The simple question is why didn't they do that 3 years ago? Then we wouldn't be in this mess. So now we're facing that very difficult choice. And I mean, I'm afraid our constitutional order demands that actually we say, yes, it's going to mean big things, and it's going to be significantly harmful in the longer it takes for us not to make this digital transition. But we cannot, in good conscience, as a country that has its founding values of dignity and equality for all, say that we're going to just move ahead and leave millions of South Africans without access to television. It's unconscionable to think that that's even a good option.
Yeah, what are we missing though if we do go ahead and make the transition? So I'm saying essentially what I'm looking to answer is why it's important for the transition to happen. Right, and we talk about the international standards and meeting international standards, but what are we missing out on if we're not able to meet those international standards?
Well, if we don't, the mobile operators don't get that digital dividend. They need that frequency in order to roll out 5G, in order to offer cheaper data, et cetera, et cetera. So that will have a significant rollout, knock-on impacts to them. But it also means that SABC is unable to improve its offering if everyone isn't available on digital. They've already got an educational channel, but that's only accessible to very limited numbers of people. If that's accessible to everyone, suddenly you start to open up a whole range of opportunities. If there's other channels that they're able to offer, then SABC again is able to make its offering that much more diverse, as are all of the other broadcasters.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but you know, Media Monitoring Africa obviously are doing a lot of advocacy around making sure that the millions that are possibly going to be left behind aren't. What other work are you doing in the conversations that you're having with some of the key role players here?
Well, unfortunately, at this stage, it looks as though we're still considering what our legal options are following the court case. The court case has given everyone a bit of breathing room, the 3-month period, but it's not looking as though, based on comments made by the Minister recently in Parliament, that we're going to be coming together, joining hands and all moving forward to get things done rapidly and to delaying that date. So at this point, I'm not sure exactly what the way forward is, but we will find one. I mean, we South Africans, we're great in a crisis. It's just that it would be nice not to have that crisis driven by, material court cases.
Yeah, we talk about South Africa's resilience all too often, I think, and we wear it as a badge of pride when we shouldn't, and we should be finding solutions. For the South African viewer, perhaps, who wants to be part of the conversation, because ultimately it seems that these are discussions that impact us as the viewer sitting at home, and one wonders if we're able to contribute to the discussion, because access to information is a basic human right. What is it that the average South African really can do?
I mean, one thing they can and should be doing is registering for a set-top box anyway. It's a good idea. If you need one and you meet the qualifying criteria, definitely register and get a set-top box, or at least ask for one to be installed. You won't get it now, but ask for one. And then I think also people should be writing to the Minister demanding, that they delay that until that. They've got to start making their voices heard on this, and to Parliament as well.
Right. Well, let's get some voices heard right now. In fact, remember, we are taking your calls. That number is 0117146842 if you'd like to be part of the conversation. We have Anonymous on the line from Kempton Park. Anonymous, good morning to you.
Hello, are you speaking to me?
Yes, Anonymous. Good morning. You're on air. Thanks for calling.
I don't have to be anonymous. My name is Brenda.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. What are your thoughts?
I was just watching this on the TV, and I'm a pensioner, and I want to know how we will get this thing for our TV. I've got an old TV, and how much it will cost us.
Okay. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much for calling. You see, this is the issue, is that we talk about it, and it is a very technical discussion for the average South African. It's, what is this thing, this set-top box? What is it going to cost me? Where do I go to get it?
So that's the other problem. So if you can afford a digital television set, then that's the easy option, because they come with these things built in and you'll automatically be able to receive it. You can't actually buy a set-top box at the moment. So that's one of the problems. The only way you can get one is through the government rollout program, and that's only if you meet their specific criteria. So if you don't, and you're in that missing middle, then you're pretty much left with the option of having to fork out a lot of money for a digital television set.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it really is.
And
quite
it should cost,
concerning.
you asked how much it costs. It should cost in the region, the set-top box should be around 900 Rand, 700 to 900 Rand, and then you've got to have it installed with an aerial. So you're looking at about 1,200 Rand, or at upwards of 2,800 Rand for a new television set.
This is what I was going to say. So for Brenda, for instance, depending on her affordability, if she's not able to get the set-top box, her next best bet is to buy a digital television. Yes. Which is not a cheap exercise.
No, and I mean, so unless we're going to see a lot of pensioners and poor people robbing banks in order to buy their television sets, it's not going to happen. Yeah,
look, let's wrap this up, William, but thank you so much for speaking to us. We really, really appreciate the time that you have given us. I know that there's a lot of civil society organizations that have been part of this conversation as well, the likes of Right to Know. I imagine you're doing some work with them as well.
Yeah, there's a free TV, Keep Free TV coalition that's working together with SOS Support Public Broadcasting. So this fight's a long way from over.
Yeah. Well, we'll be keeping a close eye on it as well, and keep us updated. Thank you so much for speaking to us. That there is William Bird from Media Monitoring Africa. Let's take a short break. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So in the last few years, a drum magazine shut down. Ndalo Media, with its titles that include Destiny and Destiny Men, also closed. Oh, the Oprah magazine also left South Africa. The SABC carried out retrenchments. E-Media shut down its ETV news and sport channel on OpenView. Yet every year, there are media and journalism students graduating and hoping to enter the industry. And some end up not finding employment in journalism. Just take a look at this.
35-year-old University of Limpopo graduate Leonard Mbiza had hopes of becoming a journalist.
I was hoping that one day I will secure an editorial post, since I've said that I like writing and storytelling. So I was very interested or passionate about securing an editorial post in one of the media spaces or in one of best publication in the country.
Leonard graduated in 2008, but has never found a job in the media and journalism industry.
You know, sometimes you need finances in order to apply for jobs and all that. Sometimes you also need money to travel. So there've been a lot in terms of wanting to get a job. So it's not as easy as someone might think, because it's so it's so emotionally breaking, because sometimes you will think you will take your last money to apply, and then at the end of the day you don't get anything. So such things, you know, sometimes it disarms us, you know, it causes us to lose hope.
He found himself in communications instead, something that wasn't part of his initial plan.
I went to Gauteng Provincial Treasury, whereby I was employed as a communication officer for copywriting and new media. My responsibility there was to gather content for publication, as well as content for website, and also running the digital platforms of the department. And then from there, my contract lapsed again, and then I've been trying to apply, and then I haven't got anything since then.
According to Leonard, he feels the industry only gives opportunities to the well-known, and graduates like him get ignored.
Our media spaces has been influxed by public figures, or people who are known, or people who are recycled from agencies. I think it would be best if ever there is an organization that champions the interest of media graduates, to say that since we have got a large volume of people who have graduated, who have a media background, why can't we use a certain strategy in terms of allocating them in certain spaces than recycling people who are already known, who are top brands already.
Full of hope and drive, Leonard hopes one day he could get a job within the journalism industry, and he encourages those who are studying and pursuing a career in journalism and media studies not to lose hope with regards to being employed.
Let them study, because my fate might not be their fate. There are people who actually come out from varsity, and then after 3 months or 4 months down the line, they secure a job. So it depends on your luck and your involvement in terms of volunteering and all that. So it takes a lot of things in terms of securing a job. Some are well connected, and then after graduating, they eventually get a job just like that. So I would say let them pursue whatever that they want to pursue. So I can't discourage anyone simply because myself I'm not working.
Yeah, that's a very frustrated young man telling his story there. And you can share your thoughts on that story as well. Give us a call on 011-714-6841 or 6842. You can also be part of the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag SABC Media and Society. Well, to help us find positives here, we are joined in studio by Professor Ilva Rodney Gumede from the University of Johannesburg. Prof, good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And we are also joined by Nzwaki Shweshwe, co-station manager of Voice of Wits. Nzwaki, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Prof. You see the young man that was talking in that package, and I imagine that you see quite a few of those disillusioned young journalists entering the space, not sure about where they're going. I mean, let's start here. Do we have a bottleneck?
See, I think what's important to remember is that we have a problem with unemployed graduates, full stop, from whichever strand of field of discipline they've come out of. So I think it's not only with journalism. Yes, the news media industry has shrunk in a sense that I would rather say it's shrunk than being in a crisis. I think sometimes we talk about a crisis and that sort of, sets a particular scene for things. I can understand the frustration here. The news media is very difficult to break into. And we don't have that kind of natural stream of journalism schools into the industry anymore through mentorships, internships, etc. So I think that's a problem. The idea that is raised by Leonard here, the student or the graduate, of sort of no names having a precedent or taking precedent over younger, new journalists into the industry. I don't know whether that is necessarily such a big problem. I think that the pool of new jobs rather is what we should be talking about that's lacking. Hey?
Yeah. Yeah, the pool of new jobs. I mean, Voice of Wits, of course, it really is a good landing place for some of those graduates, right? They're able to get some experience. But what are some of the challenges that they're facing? And is your model working of actually having them function within the university system before they go out into the real world?
Well, I think Voice of Wits, like many community radio stations across the country, whether they're based at campuses or based in communities, is just that, a place to empower the communities, to give a chance to someone like Leonard who wants to get into the industry to gain experience. Because yes, we have a problem of unemployment, but broadcasters like the SABC and other media owners aren't likely to hire someone right off, from graduation. They're looking for someone with a bit of experience. I think what often happens is that students wait until the last minute, until their last year of doing their qualification, or after they've graduated, to get into a campus radio station, and you find there's a pressure then to gain the experience. And yes, I'd say Voice of Wits is one of the many community radio stations that are well placed in empowering students. I think at the end of it, students or people or volunteers at Voice of Wits would leave understanding what broadcasting is, and not necessarily just chasing to be in front of the camera or chasing to be on air and reading news, but also appreciating the systems and every process that's within a radio station, and start imagining themselves in those positions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point, and I know that the argument quite often is made that the students want to be on screen, they want to be the presenter, and a lot of them do learn about the other facets of the media industry. But are we being too nice here and not acknowledging the fact that broadcasters and media platforms generally are shrinking? I mean, just at the beginning of that discussion, I talked about the various examples that we've seen, retrenchments across television media houses, magazines being shut down. I mean, what do we do about that reality, that the space is getting smaller?
So the space is not necessarily getting smaller. It's yes and no. Journalism is changing. The media sphere and media sector is changing, and has changed rapidly over the years. So I think that there's a difference to how we consume news. My generation is very, very different from younger generations in terms of news consumption. Even my own generation has started, consuming news in a different way. So there are more platforms out there. I think that the idea of a mainstream media sector is what has changed dramatically. So, and I think that the more we understand that, the better we can also target the way that we educate journalists, to train them, and the skill set needed, because the skill set needed for journalists have changed absolutely dramatically. So yes, there's a core of journalism that's not changing in terms of ethics, fact-finding, fact-checking, and so on, but the skill set, and particularly in terms of digital skills, is kind of rapidly changing.
Yeah, on the flip side of this conversation is the argument as well that I've heard quite often, and this is across whether it be print or television or radio, that there's also a juniorization of the newsroom that's also taking place, where a lot more graduates are entering the system, but perhaps their skill level isn't where it should be. So which one is it?
Well, I do want to add to what Prof is saying. I think I wouldn't say there's a shrink in terms of the media space. What has changed are the factors within the industry we operate in. Our business and work as journalists has remained the same, that we want to tell stories, we want to be factual. But while previously we were just using radio, print media, TV to do that, we've got other platforms like what you have that's come with the social media platforms, which has now brought on video on demand and all of the other, you spoke to William Baird earlier on, we're talking about DTT. You are now going to have so many more platforms, which means consumers are also having a lot more options to make. And why is this a challenge, or how does this speak to what we are having, to this conversation, is that previously where a media buyer or a company looking to advertise would have spent a lot of the budget that they had on television advertising, it means they now need to segment that across platforms. They're considering radio, they're considering TV, they're considering digital. They also have their own owned media platforms, whether it's their website or they are playing on the social media spaces. Suddenly, the 1 million that was available to only go to the SABC needs to go to everybody. What then this means is that the media owners themselves need to think, how else do we make money if we aren't getting that 1 million as their lone business owner? Where else can we get the rest of them, the resources to keep the newsroom together, to avoid a position where some of the newsrooms have found themselves in, where yes, they have very junior journalists who aren't experienced and to an extent could compromise the quality of the output, and in the end they lose the audiences. So they lose the way of making revenue or generating revenue, because mass media is a critical mass. You need numbers to be able to monetize. So there's a need, yes, for us to change the way we do business. There's a need also for the media owners to say, okay, how else can we find innovative ways to make more money, generate more revenue, so that the industry is sustainable?
Right. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the challenges, right? I'm going to take a short break, and then, of course, when we come back, let's start looking at a few solutions and opportunities as well for young journalists to expand themselves and look at platforms that even they can create for themselves. Perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts. Give us a call, 011-714-6842. We're back in a moment. Welcome back. So you are watching Media and Society right here on SABC News. We continue our conversation around whether or not journalism graduates are able to find jobs in the changing media landscape. Give us a call on 011-714-6841 or 714-6842. I'm still in studio with Professor Ilva Rodney Gumeta from the University of Johannesburg and Nzwaki Shweshwe, who is a station manager at Voice of Wits. So before the break, we talked about the various challenges, right? And we're saying perhaps there is a bottleneck, but not so much. And it's a shifting media landscape. But let's talk about where those shifts are going. I wonder if advertisers are starting to split their spend even to go towards the likes of Facebook and digital revenues. Do we have the skills coming out of our varsities to prepare for this new landscape?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and that, the big companies such as Google, Facebook, etc., they are important players in this space, eh? And so I do think that, and this is where this idea then of a generalization, I think that has come to mean something, it's got negative connotations. Maybe we need to change that, because I think that the younger generations are the ones that comes in with often the digital skills or a new savviness around these things. And they can easily then get absorbed into these bigger companies such as Google, Facebook, etc. So I think that we need to look at the media sphere slightly differently, And I think that, we mentioned mass media, and the question is, the age of mass media might have come and gone. The mass media, what is it really?
And this isn't good for me on a television show to hear this, but
no, but it doesn't, Naledi, don't take away from that there is a mass media sphere in that sense. Public television is always going to have a space to fulfill, and we need to make sure that that's there. So I think that, working with younger journalists is really exciting, because there's a skill set that comes in that's new. And I think that, and you said something so important earlier, and that is that it doesn't take away from actually, if you can tell a compelling story, that's so important, because that's what journalism is about,
right.
you know. So tell your stories and make them compelling, and that's where we work together in the newsroom as editors to forge that story, on whichever platform, you know. And I think that's what journalism is about, you know.
Unfortunately, though, Prof, journalism is about the story, but journalism is also a career, and we need to be able to put food on the table, whether you are experienced or whether you are entering the market. And I think one of my fears has been with regards to the digital movement, that these young people have these platforms and they can create content, but can they feed themselves with what they're making?
I think we are getting to a place where even podcasting is starting to generate revenue. I think in this country, South Africa, it's taken us a very long time to adopt to the technology of podcasting. I'd say yes. Definitely there are opportunities to monetize the platforms that we are on. The challenge that we still have is you still have the big owners or big media owners. So if we are coming from a South Africa where we had the 4 big print or media players, we are currently in a space where you've got a limited number of big podcast players. So if someone's putting together a podcast, they want it to be on Spotify, Google Podcast or Apple Podcasts. So the big owners still are the owners of the platforms. So I think, you know, what's changed really is the shape of the platforms and the way that they work. But I think there's still opportunities for us to monetize. What is required is the question that you asked earlier on is, are we producing content creators, journalists, broadcasters who leave institutions of learning with skills, not to seek employment at the SABC, but to be able to generate content and then monetize. And this is not something new that's only brought on by the digital space that we are in. We've had freelancers work at the SABC. We've had films and shows commissioned for airing at the SABC. So I'd say the core of the business we are doing has not necessarily changed. So we shouldn't really be threatened so much but by what technology has brought. It's an additional tool, it's an additional platform. We just need to find ways of how do we best use these, how do we get the best out of these platforms, and how do we monetize?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and it certainly is an interesting shift, because I've loved seeing how young storytellers have started in the digital space and then been absorbed into mainstream media as well. But if I go back to the initial question of whether or not, you know, we are churning out, you know, enough graduates that are going to actually find work, can we actually at this stage even have a discussion about putting a limit on how many journalism students we have?
So no, we can't. But I think that, I mean, it's a good question, and I think in planning for varsities or whatever, that's part of a consideration, isn't it? When you know how you structure degrees and the intake and so on, and that's an important aspect of it. But also, you know, that trained journalists, they are absorbed into other sectors of society as well, where they make a difference. And I think that's also really interesting. So journalists are actually, you know, they're desired in other occupations as well, you know, in the broader communications media industry. So let's not forget that as well, you know. But if you have a passion for journalism, then, you know, find a way to make money out of it, find the ways to be innovative in that space. And it is upon us as, you know, journalists, editors, but also media trainers, to find ways of thinking about those innovations in the industry as well, and how they can be monetized.
No, we're lucky. We work in an industry where you can be quite flexible and move into other spaces as well. We're very fortunate. And I like that optimism, because it is a very uncertain time for many in the media industry. For a young graduate who is, you know, still got starry eyes, got a bright future ahead of them in the industry, what's your advice, Nzwaki?
I think for me is, and I always say this, I spent years as a volunteer at a community radio station, because journalism, yes, I needed to put food on the table, I needed money, but it is driven by passion. So you have to find a way to make that passion sustainable. So I'd say for me is find a community media. If it's a radio station, it's a print. I think the MDDA, which is the Media Diversity Agency, has supported a number of community media initiatives. Find ways to even come together with fellow graduates, start a project, get the skills, build your portfolio.
Right.
And I think in the end, you'll find that actually you don't want to come to the SABC anymore. You want to grow your own media.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say.
Okay. Well, we really want people to come to the SABC, so I'm going to wrap it up because. But thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been a very valuable discussion, and of course, I'm really keen to hear the thoughts of our viewers as well. How we continue to shape the media landscape as we invite new talent into the mix as well. Thank you to my guest, Professor Ilva Rodney Kumeta from the University of Johannesburg, and Nzwaki Shweshwe, Station Manager of Voice of Wits. Thank you for watching Media and Society. From me and the team, it is goodbye and have yourselves a blessed Sunday.